By now, we must all know that the sea is made of tears. But if I squint, the lights on the yachts in the bay look like stars, rocking to and fro. The world seems bigger from here, from so many empty bays. And I think the only way to survive, to drown everything within myself, is to be as fervent as the sea. How I got started writing, I think a lot of that, I think, was responsibility of my folks, my parents, and the environment they created and engendered in the house with respect to the value and appreciation of reading and books and the sort of role they played in a child's imagination and the kinds of worlds that you can be exposed to and that you can, eventually think about creating. I would also say my maternal grandfather was key in that. He had some of the after school childcare duties and was always furnishing me with books that were usually above my grade level, but definitely encouraged me to imagine, different realities than the ones I was accustomed to. With respect to poetry in particular, I would say in high school, BVI High School, I remember a couple English teachers there. Some folks might remember Miss Cluett back in the early to mid 90s, English teacher at the high school. She was very supportive, as well as Jenny Wheatley was there. I can't remember which one of them would have been the first. I think Jenny Wheatley would have been the first person to introduce me to Walcott. I can even remember the poem "Ruins of a Great House" was the poem, and then that was reinforced when I got to the college, when I started reading much more deeply, especially Caribbean poets. Making time for writing is a key thing. I think early on in experimentation, a lot of people tend to think, well, you can write by inspiration, when the feeling hits you. Well, I think if you want to be serious about writing, that you have to delegate the time and the energy and the resources required for you to become better at it, to invest in yourself, whether it is monetary or just time-wise. Your situation, circumstances will determine that part, but you have to invest in yourself. So I have to set aside time. So it's easier at other times. Sometimes it's easier than other times. But I try to carve out a part of the day, every day. Try. Doesn't always work out, but you have to have that intention. And I think writing isn't always just the act of physically writing the work. Sometimes it's reading. Sometimes it's dreaming, or imagining how or thinking through how you're going to tackle a particular project. So the writing process, as to be noted, is not just the physical act of writing. It's of researching, it's reading, it's thinking actively about a particular project. Yes, I would say with respect to the research, and I have historical focuses or historical, I don't say obsessions, but concerns that speak to the work that I produce. And everything is an artifact. Everything is a record that has potential to be accessed. So a lot of that is the written word. So for example, there are works of local history that are accessible to us. Some of them, physically in a space like the college library. Others, are accessible online, etc. But also more contemporary work is available. Sometimes even things that might be in the newspaper, or sometimes even non-traditional, non-physically recorded accounts. Sometimes word of mouth has a different type of history. So all of those things, I think if you have interest in history and the real life experiences of people as inspiration, you have to be open to all of those avenues by which the information could come to you. And once you have that openness, then you can start taking notes and parsing and thinking through those things and figuring out, okay, well, how then might they form a foundation or an architecture around which I can create the fictional or the poetic. So if I had to give any advice to people who are interested in pursuing poetry, I think one thing that you cannot be scared of is rigor. And I mean, I've been writing poetry for a long time, yes, but my first book I took 5 years to write, you know, and you know, I threw away 20 poems maybe, right? So you have to be willing to go through the rigor, right? You have to be willing. You can't be, and you also can't think, okay, once you've written a poem, you're done, right? That's the first draft. You know what I mean? So you have to be willing to be very self-critical, right? And then you have to be willing to engage with other poets who you respect, whose work you admire, right? And you can't be too married to the work. So you have to be able to produce it, and then you have to be able to go back and tear it apart and put it back together again. And you have to be willing to do that as many times as it takes.
I welcome one and all to the second week of the BVI's first literary festival, to be known as the BVI Lit Fest. I trust many have enjoyed the first annual address by the Virgin Islands Poet Laureate delivered at our opening ceremony at the beginning of Culture and Tourism Month on the 1st of November. I was also pleased to hear that the Writing with Writers workshops last week on poetry, nonfiction, and publishing filled quickly. Today we begin our Let's Talk Lit panel discussions. I'm so excited by the accomplishments and talent of the panel participants. We will have the Virgin Islands Magic Fiction panel, the First Tongues Poetry panel, the Enter, Delete, Craft and Technique essay panel, and the Unseen Race and Gender in VI Society's Nonfiction Talk. Intrigued? So am I. I welcome you to the second week of the BVI Lit Fest.
Welcome to the 2021 BVI Literary Festival. A first-of-its-kind festival that celebrates and promotes a love of literature and writing in the Virgin Islands. This week's event features a Let's Talk Lit panel discussion series with authors, essayists, and poets like Andre Bagu, Amanda Chukwan, Amilcar Sanatan, Tammy Navarro, Tiphanie Yanique, Cadwell Turnbull, Raymond Antrobus, Des Seabaran, and Kinesia Lubrin. The BVI Literary Festival is a collaboration between the Department of Culture and the H. Lavadistau Community College, and it's brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, CCT, 284 Media, Alaman and Cadero, Nook Bookshop, and the Poet Laureate Program. And now, your moderator for tonight's panel, Dr. Richard Georges. Richard Georges is a writer of essays, fiction, and 3 collections of poetry. His most recent book, Epiphania, won the 2020 OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and his first book, Make Us All Islands, was shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best First Collection. His second book, Giant, was highly commended by the Forward Prizes and longlisted for the OCM Bocas Prize. Richard is a recipient of a fellowship from the Stellenbosch Institute of Advanced Study and has been listed or nominated for several other prizes, including the Halik Arvin Caribbean Writers Prize, the Wasafiri New Writing Prize, and a Pushcart Prize. He is a founding editor of Muku, an online publication focused on Caribbean art and literature. In 2020, Richard was appointed the first Virgin Islands Poet Laureate. He works in higher education and lives on Tortola with his wife and children. Welcome, Dr. Richard Georges.
Talk Lit panel discussions for the BVI Lit Fest. Very excited to be here. Almost blushing with that introduction from Bria. But tonight I'm pleased to welcome 2 of the most exciting young Caribbean writers, and they just happen to be from the VI. So I'm chuffed to share time today with Tiphanie, Yanique, and Cadwell Turnbull. So how we're going to work today is that we're going to start first with a discussion with Tiphanie. We'll go into our break and sponsors, and then we'll have a conversation with Cadwell before we bring Tiphanie and Cadwell together. So let me introduce you to Tiphanie Yanique. Tiphanie is a novelist, poet, essayist, and short story writer. She is the author of the poetry collection Wife, which won the 2016 Bocas Prize in Caribbean Poetry, and the UK's 2016 Forward Felix Dennis Prize for Best First Collection. Tiphanie is also the author of the novel Land of Love and Drowning, which won the 2014 Flaherty Dunham First Novel Award from the Center of Fiction. the Phyllis Wheatley Award for Pan-African Literature, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Rosenthal Family Foundation Award. Tiphanie was also listed by the NPR for Land of Love and Drowning being one of the best books of 2014. Land and Love of Drowning was also a finalist for the Orion Award in Environmental Literature and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. She is the author of a collection of stories, How to Escape from a Leper Colony, which won her a listing as one of the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35. Her writing has won the Bocas Award for Caribbean Fiction, the Boston Review Prize in Fiction, a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, a Pushcart Prize, a Fulbright Scholarship, and an Academy of American Poets Prize. She has been listed by the Boston Globe as one of the 16 cultural figures to watch out for, and her writing has been published in the New York Times, Best African American Fiction, the Wall Street Journal, American Short Fiction, and other places. Tiphanie is from the VI. She grew up in the hospital ground neighborhood of St. Thomas, and she lives now with her family in Atlanta, where she's a tenured associate professor at Emory University. Tiphanie, welcome to the BVI Lit Fest.
Dr. Georges, it is such a delight to be here with you. I am such a fan of you and your work, and you guys are doing a great job with the Lit Fest. I love the music that was playing earlier. I love the graphics that are on the screen. It's just really incredible. Congratulations on a wonderful BVI Lit Fest. And thanks also to Bria Smith, who's helping us all out, making this beautiful and making us look professional. I'm going to read a little bit from my new book, which is called Monster in the Middle. And Monster in the Middle came out just last year. So it's a new book. I'm sorry, just last month. I said last year, but it feel like it's been a year already. That's how much I've been traveling. But it launched last month in October, and I'm very excited about it. It's my newest thing. Monster in the Middle is a love story, but it's actually many love stories. It's a book about how we come to understand what love is something that we learn from our families, from our ancestry. We inherit our understanding of intimacy over history. It's also a very political book, a very socially conscious book, a book about the idea that love is a political act. I'm going to read from the story that is actually titled Monster in the Middle, that's at the center of the book. And each chapter in the book is also a standalone story that can be, in fact, the book could be read out of order for fun. But this chapter happens in the very middle of the book. I'm going to be reading from that chapter, and it's sort of like the middle of the monster in the middle. And this story is from the voice of Stella's father. Stella is one of the main characters, and this is her father, and she's actually listening to the story, and her father is telling the story. So for the people in the audience, you could just kind of pretend like is an old man talking and not Tiphanie and Yanique here telling the story. Monster in the Middle, the story of Stella's dad. Listen, daughter, there is no way to know anything for sure, and thank God for that. Thank God for that New Year's Day, 1968. That day the monster was on my back, but then again, the monster has always been coming for me. I'm a warm-blooded person because of where my blood comes from, island blood. Thank God for that blood and for that island, but sweet Stella, I had never been so cold. The monster was in the air. Maybe the monster was trying to yam me, eat me. But there I was. I was the kind of boy, and I was still a boy, who would come to wear sweaters in the summers of South Carolina, let my mother kiss my forehead that morning, then climbed aboard a plane. Nothing with me but a bag. One change of light clothes suitable for the West Indies, a toothbrush and a razor, the last because my mother had heard that there would be no one there who knew how to cut my black boy hair, though she hadn't thought about my needing a winter coat. And thank God for that long plane ride where I was too excited to be scared, and so watched the sky. and for that long, sleepless bus ride where my sudden fare kept me from rest. Thank God for this St. Thomas boy in a bus, me, not sleeping, but looking out the window as it became winter before my eyes. Cold monster. Did I clarify that it was New Year's Day? That the kiss was my mother's last? She was dying of cancer. You know that part already, though, right, sweet girl? Breast. Though no one but me and a doctor over in Puerto Rico knew. I wasn't allowed to tell a soul because sickness of the breast or the uterus or any part of the body we call private, the parts we used to love to make life, sickness in those parts was a shameful thing. And so I boarded that plane and climbed aboard that bus, maybe heading to my own death, not sure, but also feeling that I'd likely never see my mother again. But still, thank God for the burn in my mother's breast before I left. Thank God for her kiss goodbye that let me know it was indeed goodbye. I could tell you more about my mother, your grandmother. I should. For even she is the monster and her mother too. I just want to explain how this goes. It's a journey, but you're not alone in it. None of us is, my love. You feel alone, but you also take the journey because you don't want the loneliness. Many people go off to war because they want to be left alone, but left alone and lonely, different things, those. Me, I didn't want either, baby. Just don't be confused by my life or all these lives. It's easy to understand. See, these lives are yours. Have I made it clear that I am so thankful? Thank God for my memories and thank God for the memories that made me. We can't outrun the monster. Run, monster. And girl, did they make us run that first night? The winter air like pins in my nostrils. I had a bloody nose before a mile, but kept running because the drill sergeant was shouting and because everyone else was running too. No matter that I was in short pants and air colder than I'd ever known. Thank God for the short pants. Thank God for the ash on my knees that looked like a disease. Thank you for the blood in my nose that busted out and coated my mouth and neck and shirt and scared the sergeants just enough. That night I shivered so loudly that a bunkmate threw his blanket on me. Thank you, Nate Monster, generous monster, thank God. That extra blanket helped. I slept, but it started again and again. Every morning, the blasted running, every night, the cold and the sweating and the cold and the sweat freezing me, and the letter in the mail before basic was out telling me that my mother was dead. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Tiffany. I don't know where to start off. I feel like you could almost read another one the way that one was going. But I guess we have to start really. I think with the conversation. I mean, you referenced it before when you said that you can kind of read this out of order and out of sync. You could read different stories, sort of like as the mood takes you. And I think that leads us to a conversation that we've had before about form and sort of like the novel in stories and a non-linear story time, not a non-linear narrative, if you will. So perhaps maybe talk us through some of the formal decisions you made as a writer forming this novel, and why this is a novel that spans. I think we said this before. I think probably with Edwidge, but this is a novel that spans space, time, generations really. So maybe let's just deal with the formal part of it. What was it like trying to conceive that kind of work and how you would structure it in a way that made sense to you as a writer?
Yeah, I this is a novel. The book is a novel, but it becomes a novel later in its stages. And when I was first writing these individual chapters, I didn't quite know how they were going to link up. But what I knew is that the characters were going to be related. Um, and I knew that I wanted to work through different ideas of fiction in each story slash chapter. So my goal really was to write and challenge myself as a storyteller to tell stories in different kinds of forms, in different kinds of ways, and to deploy different kinds of technique to push my own skills and talents further and work towards doing something in storytelling with language and with structure that I hadn't done before in my own writing. So, as an artist, I always want to do something new. I'm interested in challenging myself. So, that story that I read is using language in a way that is different from the other pieces in the book. So there are some stories in the collection. Chapter 1, for example, is really a chapter that's about movement, and I created a form based on film structure called the road narrative. In film studies, this is called a road film. It's something that if you ever talk to a movie buff, they could tell you all about the road films like Thelma and Louise, or even more recent ones like Queen and Slim, which are like very American, actually, like US style films that put people in a car and then drive them across the country. And I thought, well, what if I did that in fiction? And what would that look like? And how could I make my story actually move in the way that those kinds of movies actually have a kind of propulsive energy that the plot is based on the actual movement of the car. So I'm doing that in the first story. There's some stories that are written in the epistolary form. They're like letters. There's some stories that have a lot of flashback. There's some stories that are written in poetic form, like the Sestina. There's stories that are written from different point of views and perspectives. So I'm really just kind of playing with all the different things in fiction that I wanted to test for myself. The truth is, though, that if you read it in order, which I hope people actually do, you have a different experience than if you read it out of order. I mean, if you read it out of order, you could have a really cool experience piecing together different kinds of history. Oh, thank you. But part of what making it into a novel was for me was making a decision on the order. And since I want the book to be about what it really means to be part of an ancestry, part of a family, part of a history, I want the book to be about how our individuality is always made up of multiplicity. The choice that I made was to start in the past and bring us forward to the couple that is the love affair of the book. But we begin first with their parents, and we learn how their parents, the parents of Fly and the parents of Stella, how they come to understand what love means and how they pass that understanding down to their children. So then we see how Stella comes to be who she is and how Fly comes to be who he is. And when they find each other, we know actually more than they do about the kinds of legacies that they're bringing to their relationship. So I could have done it the other way. I could have put them first and then gone backwards. But I really wanted to emphasize the history aspect. So I begin with the history.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And is when you talk about it being based on the road film, the road narrative, that's like, why didn't I pick that up? Because it is a propulsive, tugging, in that, especially in that first story, literally as the car, like, pulls the narrative across the width of the continent, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But in the before the reader gets to the first story, I think there's an epigraph, right? But we won't talk about epigraph just yet. But after you turn the page from the epigraph, there's a map that contains the contiguous United States and the Caribbean. I'm assuming that wasn't just a decision made by your publisher. So perhaps talk to us about that. And because we do move from California all the way to the Virgin Islands within the context of the book. So maybe that's too literal a reason. So I was wondering, just your choices there in terms of why the map.
Yes. Richard, you and I have talked a lot about maps as an important resonance, an important inspiration, an important way of structuring um, stories and poetry in the Caribbean and maybe in particular Virgin Islands context. And I do think that there is a Caribbean form that we could call the map form, in which we are um, perhaps out of colonial anxiety, but also out of regional and national pride, are wanting to label and claim awareness and knowledge of ourselves, and connecting that knowledge of our selfhood to our knowledge and awareness of our land and the landscape itself. So I think often you will see in in earlier generations of West Indian writing, but also in our generation, um, tendency to say I was in this part of the island, and then I was over there, and then I was over there, and then I was over there, and to actually name these things, um, and make them and call them into relevance. And by saying like this thing that I name this thing because it's worthy of literature. I name this thing because it's worthy of being talked about and understood. The way in which probably everyone in the literate world can reference and think about New York, because we've seen New York either on TV, but many of us have read about New York City in literature. New York is almost, you can almost take for granted that New York is worthy of literature, but we can't really do that in the region. Can't take for granted that our islands are worthy of high art. So I think it's a kind of desire to claim ourselves and our place. For a fiction writer, eh, no publisher is going to suggest to me that I should put a map in the book because it's expensive. Somebody has to design the physicality of the map, but also it's an image in a thing that's actually made for text. So it's an extra labor, but also an extra expense for the publisher. So this was my idea. It was a very important aspect of the book for me. Um, and I mean, I'll show everybody how it looks on the page. Yeah. And I label the map, uh, it's called Map of an American Love Story, but I label different parts of the story where the characters move. And while my book, Land of Love and Johnny, my previous novel, was really a book exploring um, the Virgin Islands place within the region. What does it mean to be a Virgin Islander within the Caribbean context? This book is about what does it mean to be a Virgin Islander within the American context, the US context. What does it mean to be like a colonized person in this space? And so it's really important to me to make a map of the US and to show that like there's more America to the west, right? Like outside of the continent. And there's more America to the southeast, and that's where we are in the Caribbean region. All of this is US too because of colonization. But even still, there's America to the north, there's Alaska. But then there's America's influence way to the east across the Atlantic Ocean. So just sort of thinking through the ways in which American imperialism has kind of been like like spread. Um, and that when we think about the borders of the United States, we have to actually consider that our borders are much more imaginative than they are, hard and fast. I think I may have frozen a little bit. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. I was wondering if just not sure. Bria, are we frozen?
Hello, Dr. Georges.
By now, we must all know that the sea is made of tears. But if I squint, the lights on the yachts in the bay look like stars, rocking to and fro. The world seems bigger from here, from so many empty bays. And I think the only way to survive, to drown everything within myself, is to be as fervent as the sea. How I got started writing, I think a lot of that, I think, was responsibility of my folks, my parents, and the environment they created and engendered in the house with respect to the value and appreciation of reading and books and the sort of role they played in a child's imagination and the kinds of worlds that you can be exposed to and that you can, eventually think about creating. I would also say my maternal grandfather was key in that. He had some of the after school childcare duties and was always furnishing me with books that were usually above my grade level, but definitely encouraged me to imagine different realities than the ones I was accustomed to. With respect to poetry in particular, I would say in high school, BVI high school, I remember a couple English teachers there. Some folks might remember Miss Cluett back in the early to mid 90s, English teacher at the high school. She was very supportive, as well as Jenny Wheatley was there. I can't remember which one of them would have been the first. I think Jenny Wheatley would have been the first person to introduce me to Walcott. I can even remember the poem "Ruins of a Great House" was the poem, and then that was reinforced when I got to the college, when I started reading much more deeply, especially Caribbean poets. Making time for writing is a key thing. I think early on in experimentation, a lot of people tend to think, well, you can write by inspiration, when the feeling hits you. Well, I think if you want to be serious about writing, that you have to delegate the time and the energy and the resources required for you to become better at it, to invest in yourself, whether it is monetary or just time-wise. Your situation, circumstances will determine that part, but you have to invest in yourself. So I have to set aside time. So it's easier at other times. Sometimes it's easier than other times. But I try to carve out a part of the day, every day. Try. Doesn't always work out, but you have to have that intention. And I think writing isn't always just the act of physically writing the work. Sometimes it's reading. Sometimes it's dreaming, or imagining how or thinking through how you're going to tackle a particular project. So the writing process, as we noted, is not just the physical act of writing. It's of researching, it's reading, it's thinking actively about a particular project. Yes, I would say with respect to the research, and I have historical focuses or historical, I don't say obsessions, but concerns that speak to the work that I produce. And everything is an artifact. Everything is a record that has potential to be accessed. So a lot of that is the written word. So for example, there are works of local history that are accessible to us. Some of them, physically in a space like the college library. Others, are accessible online, etc. But also more contemporary work is available. Sometimes even things that might be in the newspaper, or sometimes even non-traditional, non-physically recorded accounts. Sometimes word of mouth has a different type of history. So all of those things, I think, if you have interest in history and the real life experiences of people as inspiration, you have to be open to all of those avenues by which that information could come to you. And once you have that openness, then you can start taking notes and parsing and thinking through those things and figuring out, okay, well, how then might they form a foundation or an architecture around which I can create the fictional or the poetic. So if I had to give any advice to people who are interested in pursuing poetry, I think one thing that you cannot be scared of is rigor. And I've been writing poetry for a long time, yes, but my first book I took 5 years to write. I threw away 20 poems maybe. Right? So you have to be willing to go through the rigor, right? You have to be willing. You can't be, and you also can't think, okay, once you've written a poem, you're done, right? That's the first draft. You know what I mean? So you have to be willing to be very self-critical, right? And then you have to be willing to engage with other poets who you respect, whose work you admire. Right, and you can't be too married to the work. So you have to be able to produce it, and then you have to be able to go back and tear it apart and put it back together again. And you have to be willing to do that as many times as it takes. By now, we must all know that the sea is made of tears. But if I squint, the lights on the yachts in the bay look like stars, rocking to and fro. The world seems bigger from here, from so many empty bays. And I think the only way to survive, to drown everything within myself, is to be as fervent as the sea. How I got started writing, I think a lot of that, I think, was the responsibility of my folks, my parents, and the environment they created and engendered in the house with respect to the value and appreciation of reading and books and the sort of role they played in a child's imagination and the kinds of worlds that you can be exposed to and that you can, eventually think about creating. I would also say my maternal grandfather was key in that. He had some of the after school childcare duties and was always furnishing me with books that were usually above my grade level, but definitely encouraged me to imagine, different realities than the ones I was accustomed to. With respect to poetry in particular, I would say in high school, BVI High School, I remember a couple English teachers there. Some folks might remember Miss Cluett back in the early to mid 90s, English teacher at the high school. She was very supportive, as well as Jenny Wheatley, who was there. Definitely encouraged me to imagine, different realities than the ones I was accustomed to. With respect to poetry in particular, I would say in high school, BVI High School, I remember a couple English teachers there. Some folks might remember Miss Cluett back in the early to mid 90s, English teacher at the high school. She was very supportive, as well as Jenny Wheatley, who was there. I can't remember which one of them would have been the first. I think Jenny Wheatley would have been the first person to introduce me to Walcott. I can even remember the poem "Ruins of a Great House" was the poem, and then that was reinforced when I got to the college, when I started reading much more deeply, especially Caribbean poets. Making time for writing.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. From all of your neighbors at the National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
It's always a pleasure coming to you live and direct from the What's Back Really Cool.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you to our sponsors, CCT, Alaman and Cordero, and National Bank of the Virgin Islands. Apologize for the technical difficulties we experienced with some connection issues from our production house, but we're back and happy to be here. I have to thank Tiphanie for your patience and for sticking around with us. Tonight's going to be a little bit longer than planned. But Tiphanie, I think we're going to ask you to give us one more reading, and I have a couple more questions, I think, for you after you share with us and our viewers.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And can you guys see me? Okay. All right.
Oh, we just lost Tiphanie.
We have to have fortitude to make art in the world.
Oh, there we are.
Okay, nobody is going to make it easier for people of color, people from the Caribbean, to share our artistic vision. So we just have to be,
we're happy that we have the virtual space. But clearly, Tiphanie, I think you would agree. I think we need a physical space.
I can't wait for that. I'm
to
longing
avoid,
for it. Really and truly, just longing for it.
Tribulations, yes. Okay, but it seems like we're good now. So we'll strike while the iron is hot. So please.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm going to read from a story in the book my book Monster in the Middle, for those folks who are just joining on Facebook or are rejoining. I'm going to read from a section that's mermaid section. A mermaid is Stella's grandmother. Mermaid is being raised in an orphanage, and she is a Virgin Islander, but the orphanage is in Puerto Rico. And the orphanage is actually has children from all over the region who are there in the home for a real home in which my father was raised. And I picked up her stories to I think I'm can still hear me. Yeah. The Burma is the one telling the story, and her telling the story, she's introducing a person who's Martin, and Martin is new. He's older. He's in the orphanage, but he's the newest addition in the orphanage, and he's an older person. He's gonna be a teenager, while the rest of them are younger than that. So this is May talking with Martine, who's actually the Turn to one of the women in our home in their house with Martine's son. And with the mustache, wore pants and boots. Horses and in family, so he wasn't orphan. His mother is dead. Told us we now assumed. Oh, a lot of cussing on Facebook. I hope people are, okay. And I know we're having a little bit of a glitch with the internet, but I'll keep on going. Hopefully it's coming through to some extent. We began to wonder if they had told us other lies. If the baby girl was not from Trinidad, but was full Taino as she looked. If Joseph was the 5 years old he appeared to be and not the 10 months. If inherit or she was she's seen. Mi madre está very alive. On Sunday after Mass, women walked up to the seas. Sometimes all children went alive except for me. Even the girl was the youngest. I stayed in the car in death. I walked in mountains, rocks, came up to me. My mother knows them, but I hadn't seen. But first day was behind me in the water. He just and my legs. Didn't see no stranger. So I let Martine me and below me until I flew in upstairs a corpse and felt the of me. I knew what my body looked like. That was pervy to me. I was straight in the sea. Boys there were gentle below and I felt the coolness of beneath his hands in my I kept my eyes tight. I studied I moved my feet, opened my eyes.
that the sea is made of tears. But if I squint, the lights on the yachts in the bay look like stars, rocking to and fro. The world seems bigger from here, from so many empty bays. And I think the only way to survive, to drown everything within myself, is to be as fervent as the sea. How I got started writing, I think a lot of that, I think, was responsibility of my folks, my parents, and the environment they created and engendered in the house with respect to the value and appreciation of reading and books and the sort of role they played in a child's imagination and the kinds of worlds that you can be exposed to and that you can, eventually think about creating. I would also say my maternal grandfather was key in that. He had some of the after school childcare duties and was always furnishing me with books that were usually above my grade level, but definitely encouraged me to imagine, different realities than the ones I was accustomed to. With respect to poetry in particular, I would say in high school, BVI High School, I remember a couple English teachers there. Some folks might remember Miss Cluett back in the early to mid 90s, English teacher at the high school. She was very supportive, as well as Jenny Wheatley was there. I can't remember which one of them would have been the first. I think Jenny Wheatley would have been the first person to introduce me to Walcott. I can even remember the poem "Ruins of a Great House" was the poem, and then that was reinforced when I got to the college, when I started reading much more deeply, especially Caribbean poets. Making time for writing is a key thing. I think early on in experimentation, a lot of people tend to think, well, you can write by inspiration, when the feeling hits you. Well, I think if you want to be serious about writing, that you have to delegate the time and the energy and the resources required for you to become better at it, to invest in yourself, whether it is monetary or just time-wise. Your situation, circumstances will determine that part, but you have to invest in yourself. So I have to set aside time. So it's easier at other times. Sometimes it's easier than other times. But I try to carve out a part of the day, every day. Try. Doesn't always work out, but you have to have that intention. And I think writing isn't always just the act of physically writing the work. Sometimes it's reading. Sometimes it's dreaming, or imagining how or thinking through how you're going to tackle a particular project. So the writing process, as to be noted, is not just the physical act of writing. It's of researching, it's reading, it's thinking actively about a particular project.
Hey, Tiffany. So let's have you read a second passage for us, and then I have a few more questions for you. And I think we'll hope to welcome Cadwell in shortly.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to hearing Cadwell. I'm just going to start by reading from a passage from a character whose name is Mermaid, and she is the mom of the main character. And Mermaid is telling Stella how she met her father. So Mermaid is describing what it was like to be raised in an orphanage in Puerto Rico, which is based on a real home for children that existed in Puerto Rico that my grandmother actually was raised in. And she's talking about when Martine first comes in to the home and what it's like to meet Martine. It turned out that one of the women of our home in Vega Baja was Martine's aunt. The Spanish-speaking bitchy one with the mustache who wore pants and boots. The one who rode the horses and never milked the cows. The women had taken him in as family, so it wasn't even a proper orphan. Martine's mother is dead, both women had told us. A falsehood we now assumed. We began to wonder if they had told us other lies. If the baby girl was not from Trinidad but was full Taino as she looked. If Joseph was the 5 years old he appeared to be and not the 10 the woman claimed. If Darlene would inherit the orphanage house and all the land like she was always saying, or if she was just straight loca like she seemed. Mi madre está viva, Martine said, very alive. On Sundays after Mass, the woman walked us to the seas. Sometimes we would skip the whole way. Sometimes we would sing. All the children swam in the living sea, except for me. Even baby girl, who was the youngest, but me, I stayed in the calm waters, in the death. There I could walk out to the mountain of rocks and still the water only came out to my hips. My brother had known how to swim, but it hadn't saved him. But on Martine's first Sunday with us, he came up behind me in the shallow water. He placed his arm on my back and bent to cradle my legs. I didn't squeal as I knew strange Darlene would have. She was almost 17 and had novios who were always leaving get-ups under her windowsill. I let Martine lift me and then gently lower me until I floated in the still water, his hands holding me up. I lay out as stiff as a corpse and felt the sun above me. I knew what my body looked like. Nothing like curvy Darlene. I was straight and flat as a board in all directions, and now in the water, I imagined myself to be a board, floating, floating in the Dead Sea. What waves there were gentle and more gentle. Martine's hands below loosened and then loosened more. I felt the coolness of the water between his hands and my body. I kept my eyes closed up tight, tight. A board, I told myself, a mudaskuntin board. I steadied my breathing. The water behind me warmed. I moved my arm to feel for Martine, but he wasn't there. And I opened my eyes in a panic and flayed like a fool, but my feet hit sand. I looked around and I saw him. Across the sand dune in the living, rough sea, standing against the heavy waves and speaking with tiny Joseph, who was squatting in the water. Only Joseph's head came above the sea line. It bobbed like it was the only part of him. I looked away, scared and stupid. How long had Martine left me? How long had I floated on my own? At my feet were little sparkling fish swimming in circles. I laid my head back, stretched myself out, and then I just floated. I didn't think about my actual older brother. I thought and thought only of Martine. The next Sunday, Martine taught me how to kick. He crouched down and put my palms on his shoulders so that our faces were close, close. And I kicked and I kicked. After a month of Sundays, I could actually swim. Like I had been doing it my whole life. Like no one I had ever loved had ever drowned. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I really like that one, especially that ending. A little
Thank you.
callback. A little
Yes.
callback.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Yes, yes. So Tiffany, I think I have a couple questions for you. Maybe let's do one question and then we'll welcome Cadwell into the conversation. And I think I'll probably end the questions with how I will intend to start with Cadwell. And you know, it really is a question about what we mean by the title of this panel discussion, the Virgin Islands Magic. You know, and I think of you know, the sort of response Kai Miller gives when people ask him if he writes, you know, magic realism. So I was wondering, I think it might be a little bit different between the two of you, but what does it mean to you to sort of embrace a sort of magic or the surreal in your fiction? And I'm sure it's a political choice, so that's why I'm asking the question.
It is very much a political choice. I mean, I do not think that you get to a place like the Caribbean where you have people whose ancestry just the other day involved slavery, still currently involves colonialism, um, various aspects of misogyny, genocide. I don't think you get to a place where there is also a Dr. Georges and also a Professor Yanique and also a novelist of two brilliant books, Cadwell. Like, I don't think you get to that without magic. Like, I just think it's kind of absurd and impossible and surreal that you and I and Allah, we exist and are mostly healthy emotionally and mentally, that we are able to be in conversation with each other, that we have self pride when the whole world has conspired against our humanity, when we should just not exist. The very reality of our existence is can only be, I think, chalked up to belief and to hope and to magic. So for me, um, just claiming that I will always write about the Virgin Islands and that there will always be Virgin Islanders peopled in my books is a political stance, but it's also a complete surreal reality that that Virgin Islanders are even in books in this way. I mean, 200 years ago, nobody would have imagined that the books that we have written could ever have possibly existed. And here we are. You know, we are somebody's fantasy. There, we are somebody's magic incantation. So I just think magic is so inherent to who we are and what we are. And so, you know, just the fact that I'm writing is already a magical thing. But so it's very natural to appear in my work. Um, it feels very organic and very true and very real because it's the reality of where I've come from. Yeah.
Thanks for that answer. Thanks, Tiffany. And now, you're free to stick around. You've been with us for the long haul, because we are, if nothing, a resilient people. Whether it would be hurricane or pandemic or telecommunications.
What?
So,
Every
or
time
time zones.
or time zone.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to hearing Cadwell speak. I love his work. I'm looking forward to hearing your conversation. I might close my camera so that the attention can be on you guys. But I'm excited to listen in.
All right. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you. Good night,
Great having
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Cadwell, brother man, welcome.
Hey, what's good? What's going on?
Well, some things are still good, Cadwell. We're happy to have you here.
Me
On
too.
the inaugural BVI Lit Fest, Virgin Islands Magic Fiction panel. And
Wait, can
allow
you
me,
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you
Okay.
fine. So allow me to introduce you to the viewing public. So, folks, Cadwell Turnbull is the author of The Lesson. His short fiction has appeared in The Verge, Lightspeed, Nightmare, Asimov's science fiction, and several anthologies, including the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy of 2018 and the year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy 2019. His novel, The Lesson, was the winner of the 2020 Newcomb Institute Literary Award in the debut category. Cadwell was also shortlisted for the VCU Cabell Award and longlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award. Cadwell lives in Raleigh and teaches at North Carolina State University. But Cadwell, perhaps you are the author of your newest book, No Gods, No Monsters, and perhaps we can begin tonight's chat with you telling our viewers a little bit about the premise of your new book. And maybe you could also share with us some of the other things about the lesson that maybe that might not be in your bio.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So the new book is No Gods, No Monsters. It just came out in September. It's about how the world responds when monsters come out of the shadows for the first time. These are monsters from popular myths, so there's some werewolves in there's some vampires as well, but also monsters from Caribbean folklore. There's a Sukuyant in here. Um, there's woo woos. There's all kinds of other things that's kicking around in the dark that are just coming out into the world, and they're demanding human rights. And it's about how the world adjusts to that, and it follows several characters as some of them monsters, some of them humans, adjust to this new reality where monsters are known, and it's causing quite an upheaval within the global stage. Um, I should say something about the lesson as well. So my first novel was a lesson. It was a Alien First Contact novel set in the Virgin Islands. I very much consider these books, sibling books or sister books. The lesson is concerned with looking at threats from without, and then No Gods and Monsters is about looking at threats from within. So with the lesson, it's an alien invasion. With No Gods, No Monsters, it's all of these things that we thought did not exist. They do exist, and what does that mean for the world that they do? Um, I don't know if that answered the question about
Oh,
the
for
lesson.
sure. For
Okay,
sure.
all right.
Yeah. So I have my siblings right there. But
Appreciate it.
yeah. So I think for folks who may not have picked up, you are. Well, I hope they would have picked up. You are an author of what we call speculative fiction.
That's right.
I think maybe it might help to define that for some of the readers. I think people, I think might be familiar with fantasy and sci-fi, but may not necessarily understand what we mean when we talk about speculative fiction.
Right, got it. Yeah, it includes those things. So it's science fiction, it's fantasy. I write all over the place though, so it's those genres and then all of the subgenres and liminal genres within that umbrella. So science fiction, fantasy, horror, slipstream, weird, all of these things that writers recognize, but readers might dabble in or understand it when they see it. So some of my stories are just quietly speculative. So it's mostly set in our world, but something weird is going on, and then some stories are like highly speculative. Like No Gods No Monsters has monsters, but it also has parallel universes and all kinds of crazy stuff in it.
Right.
So it's the range of experience, horror included.
Yeah, because I think No Gods No Monsters, I mean, by and large, it is this world. It's just that what's that one thing that's not what we are accustomed to. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Because it has, and it is very much the contemporary world. I mean, how much of that? I mean, I think there's some obvious contemporary connections in terms of social justice movements and police brutality and other things that more than just echo, but they ring out in terms of how this world is so similar to ours. But I want to start where we ended with Tiphanie, and it is, writing in a space where magic or the surreal is within your bounds. What does that mean, or what sort of freedom does that give you as a writer? How do you use that as a tool or as a device to reach for whatever truth your work is seeking to unveil?
Right. I caught the end of what Tiffany was saying, but it deeply resonated with me. This idea that existing as a Caribbean person in this world is magical. The story that comes to mind, and part of the inspiration for the book is when I was a kid, I would play outside with the neighborhood kids when I visited my grandmother's house, and there was just up the hill on the way to get there was a place that sold candy and specials, and I know you recognize that. It's like ice popsicles that are in a cup, and so we would run up the hill to get specials and candy and all of this stuff from this guy that was selling them, but we would pass a house on the way that we all believed Cowfoot Lady lived in that house. And so every time we would go up the hill, we would walk or run or play. And then as soon as we got close to the house, we would run quickly past it. and then we would get our candy and continue our conversations, and then run quickly past when we were coming down again. And there's just this way that the magic lives alongside the real in in back home, where even people that don't consider themselves particularly superstitious still know not to mess with certain things, or not to do certain things, or say certain things, or to avoid certain areas at certain times of the night. So like bringing that into fiction just felt natural to me. It felt like a thing that I was already experiencing in my own world. And the other thing about speculative fiction, I think it allows for the addressing of things that are deeply political, but disguised in some way, so that people can look at the thing without bringing too much of their own biases to it. Speculative fiction can work as a way of like kind of bringing down boundaries and allow people to look at a specific thing and ask questions in relation to that thing without feeling like they are implicated, even though they might be. And so I find that writing in this genre allows me to ask like deep questions, but use metaphors sometimes to ask those deep questions. Or use, in this case, monsters to say something about intersectional politics and resistance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so there's some critical theory and some psychology, interwoven in there.
Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, when I think of monsters, like there is the Euro pantheon of the literary canon. So that's like the first impulse that the West sort of is up there. But you are able to integrate, and I'm part used to the word, but you're able to integrate, a much more diverse pantheon of supernatural beings. But I wanted to jump back a couple of years to The Lesson, which you mentioned as a first contact novel set in St. Thomas. Now, I wanted to jump into that because you mentioned, the sort of the power of freedom of speculative fiction to allow you to kind of engage in different kinds of political conversations, with that mask, with that layer of the spectacular on top of it to sort of, sometimes subtly address these issues. But The Lesson, I think, is kind of in your face in a bit because, you're in a colonized space and there's another layer of colonization occurring. In some ways, the first contact in The Lesson, you could be the early years of the first contact or early days and months of the first contact of Europeans in the Caribbean, and where there's a feeling out, in terms of how the two groups are going to interact until a clear power dynamic is established, and where one group realizes that, the rules are different for us versus the rules for them. And so I know, again, I had this conversation with Tiphanie before about these political decisions we make as writers, but you must have thought about those layers and those different textures that you were then creating by using the first contact story to tell one of colonization. And not to make it too long a question, but a lot of first contact fiction is either one or two things. It's sort of like the alien invasion. So if you look at film, you look at the Independence Day, and the humanity repels the invasion, or Signs, or different takes on that first contact, which is sort of like an invasive force. And then you have the other one where humans are attempting to colonize. But this is a sort of not either of those things. I don't think that there's a whole lot of work that has that level of subtlety and complexity to it, where the humanity is not the dominant species in the colonial model.
Right.
So talk to me about how you thought through that dynamic and those layers of power, and and you make it very human and personal at the same time. So talk to me about the construction of The Lesson's plot and concept.
I appreciate you saying that. I'll say that, for me, thinking about anything within the Virgin Islands context, talking about colonialism or colonization is inevitable. I believe The Land of Love and Drowning is on the shelf, and I was looking at that and how Tiphanie does this really amazing job of balancing all of the magical realist qualities of the story with the critique or the discussion of colonialism. But it's natural that those things live together if you're discussing St. Thomas or the Virgin Islands as a place. And for the lesson, for me, I knew I wanted to do a first contact novel. I knew I wanted to be set in the Virgin Islands, and I knew that would be a part of the lens of the people. Having this history of colonialism, they would look at these aliens and the presence of these aliens in a way that would be unique. And not the way that, someone from New York might look at an alien invasion, or someone from DC or LA, these first contact, settings that we get a lot in media and in fiction. And, thinking about that, it made me want to do a good job of exploring all of the nuanced ways that different people within that structure or within this place would orient themselves in relation to this threat from the outside. I have a character that reads a lot of science fiction books, and he has like a very naive way of looking at the alien presence, and he's being challenged by the people around him about his naive view of the aliens, and at the same time, he is challenging the aliens, particularly a character named Mira, to question her own assumed power dynamics within this context. It's a challenging thing. It's a thing that even now when I read parts of that book or I think about parts of that book, I still want to explore that in new ways and in different ways. I feel like that's something that I really want to return to. But for me, it was really important to at the very least, have that lens be a part of how the characters in the story responded to these aliens and what they were doing. The Ina aren't easily mapped on to world powers. They have their own ideology, their own culture, their own history and context. But it is easy for Virgin Islanders within their context to see the parallels being made there. The way that the Ina come and they offer gifts in exchange for subjugation. And that, in some ways, all of the different characters have to contend with how much of that they want to challenge, how much of that they want to fight, and how much they can fight. And, any choice that anyone makes has its own ramifications, whether internal or external. And I wanted to do that justice. And I felt like the way to do that was to give a lot of different perspectives and have it be a mosaic narrative where all of these different points of view are competing and challenging each other.
Thanks for that very layered response, because it's something that I think the first time I heard you read from the lesson, I was like, I don't think it was out yet when I first heard you read from it, and I was like, I think there was a scene. I want to even say, was it at Mary Point? Was it like almost like a very reminiscent of narratives that we know before of revolt and insurrection. But Cadwell, I'm going to ask you to read before we move on, because we started doing this in the mirror to how we did it with Tiphanie, and you can read from whichever book you wish. I'm not sure. Yes, you tell us what you're going to read from, and then we have a couple questions for you from the audience that I'll get to.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. My office is right next to the road, so there's probably cars passing. And now I've lost the part that I wanted to read. I'm going to read from No Gods. And I also want to mention, I just remember the scene that you're talking about. I think it's set in the past. It's during the slave insurrection in St. John. Yeah, that scene is rough. I'm not going to read that scene. I'm going to read a scene from a character that I really love. Her name is Sandra, and it's about her growing up and she's a monster. She's a were-dog of the Antilles. She is her transformation. She turns into a wild dog that is from Western Africa, and it's linked to hurricanes. Her transformation is linked to hurricanes. But she has a sister, an adopted sister, that is a sukkuyant who removes her skin and sucks blood. So, all right. Chapter 42. Sandra was an only child until she was 7. Her parents doted on her, amused by her every action. She shone under their attention. Her mother and father both came from families strong with the gift, so they weren't surprised when Sandra started showing signs of a keen nose and sensitivity to magic. Our daughter, her father said to her mother, and Sandra first picked up when Sandra first picked up their scent. He was glowing with such pride. One night she woke up and caught the scent of strange magic in the air. She sat up in bed, stared into the darkness. Nothing was there, but Sandra felt the chill of warning slide through her. She got up and turned on the light. Nothing still, but her door was slightly ajar. She kept the door closed. She walked over, closed the door, and turned off the light, then smelled it again on her way back to the bed. Sandra woke the next morning to her father watching her. He was just standing there, his entire body tensed in anticipation. "Don't move," he said. And then she smelled it again, that same touch of wild magic, only closer now, right in her nose, so ripe it burned. She slowly turned in the direction of the smell, and that's when she saw it. Something solid had been lying right next to her, was now lying next to her. The bedsheet squirmed, moved by something that appeared as nothing. Her father growled. "I'm sorry," came a small voice. "I didn't know, please." It was a young girl's voice, and she was crying. In her skin, the girl was an accumulation of disturbing parts. Skinny arms and legs, distended stomach. Her face was a sunken thing, dark circles around protruding eyes. The girl reminded Sandra of an owl, hardly blinking in her quiet observance of the world. Sandra imagined the little girl in other people's houses, in their corners, watching them eat or sleep or use the bathroom. Those same owl eyes, seeing everything. It made Sandra itch, that knowledge, and she couldn't help but imagine all the private things the girl might have glimpsed when Sandra didn't know she was there. "We would have noticed," her father said, flaring his nostrils, but Sandra found no comfort in that. She remembered that night, sleeping beside her and not knowing, those owl eyes on her as she dreamed. They eventually named the girl Sonia. Her father sat Sandra down and said, "She's a sukkuyant. Do you remember the stories I told you about them?" Sandra squirmed in her seat. Yes, she remembered. Creatures who could remove their skin and live off blood. It was old magic, like hers, but rarer. They were all supposed to be extinct. They also were supposed to be extinct. "She has no one to care for her," her father said. "No one to keep her safe." Sandra knew the rest before he got there. "You've decided to take her in. It's done." Now Sandra and Sonia would share a room, twin beds on opposite walls. Now the owl eyes would watch her sleep every night. Sandra tried to protest. "She is your sister now. Be a good sister," her mother said. Sandra had tears in her eyes. "I don't want a sister." Sonia was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of Fruit Loops, watching the whole argument play out in the living room. Sandra's mother glared at her. "I won't accept this behavior." Sandra didn't dare say another word. That first night was terrible. She twisted and turned, unable to sleep. Sonia wasn't a talker. She was used to running around at night, so she wasn't sleeping either. Sonia just sat on her bed, so still, so quiet, her breath a whisper. Sandra wouldn't speak either. It was a war waged through silence. Weeks of it, no exchanges between them. As time passed, Sonia got healthier, her face filling out, arms and legs strengthening. She was beginning to look like something nearer to human. Sandra's parents doted on the wretched girl, making sure she was clean and fed. They were teaching her how to read and write. They were buying her clothes. Sonia liked to watch the news, so they watched it with her every night. Sandra spent a lot of time in her room, which was also now Sonia's room. Sandra extended her silences to her parents,
rejected their shows of affection, ignored their apologies for spending so much time with Sonia, the calls for her to make Sonia feel at home. It wasn't Sonia's home, and they weren't Sonia's parents. She was a monster. They had to stop from removing its own skin at night. Several times they found the skin lying around the house and had to sniff her out or else wait for her to return to it. Sandra hated the sight of it, pink on the inside, rubbery and wet, the soft hair sticking out from pores, the greasy smell like burnt oil and raisins. She held her grudge for months, trying to wait them out, make them suffer so they'd get rid of the girl. Sandra could not imagine ever loving Sonia as a sister. Sandra was young and never considered time with her parents to be anything but infinite. They would eventually return to loving her and only her, she thought, and their lives would continue in uninterrupted love forever. On all counts, Sandra was wrong. I just stopped there.
You guys with these good, compelling endings to chapters. it's definitely a compels the reader to turn the page. So thank you for sharing with us that passage from No Gods, No Monsters. So a couple questions for you, Cadwell, and the first is from the audience, and the question is, how do you see the relationship between speculative fiction and culture? So, what are you what are the boundaries between the speculative and the real? And I think you sort of touched on these points a little bit earlier, but I don't think we came at it from a question of culture explicitly. So.
Okay. All right. That's a tough one. I'll try to answer it best I can. And it's different depending on the story. So with the lesson, it was culture as lens. So it's how culture affects how people within the story view the speculative. So, being someone from the Virgin Islands, how would that affect how you view aliens? I think that it's different if you're from the Virgin Islands. And there's some things that are individual, some things that are personal. Like I said, Derek one of my characters has a very specific way of viewing things, but Patrice also has a very specific way of viewing things. What's in common between them is that Virgin Islands context, so that culture and how that acts upon their response to these elements. With No Gods, No Monsters, it's more of tying those speculative elements to the context at hand. So, instead of just writing about werewolves, I wanted to write about a particular creature that is linked to hurricanes. Instead of having the transformation tied to the moon, I wanted it to be tied to something that people from the Caribbean and people from the Virgin Islands would recognize. It's storms, these storms that come that we face every year in a season, and I also wanted to write about the Sukuyan, and how.
Because I don't think people often recognize or realize, the work of writing. It is a very labor-intensive, often a very solitary endeavor. Mm-hmm. So how do you block out? How do you schedule? How do you construct your life around these projects? Or is it something that do you write it as it comes, or do you have to have a regimented sort of approach to getting it done?
That's a real big question. So I'll start with saying that I find it kind of funny and interesting that to be described as prolific, that's not how I feel. I think some of that is because before I started publishing in 2017, I think. It's been 4 years. It's been an interesting while 4 years. But I was writing and working on fiction in my MFA for many years before that. I started my MFA in 2012. And before that, I was working on fiction. I was working on fiction in my undergrad. And so it took me the better part of a decade before I published anything that I was seriously working on. I was writing in high school and stuff, but nothing that I I would want to see the light of day, and then some things in undergrad that I have buried deep in a hole. But some of my stories that I've published recently, though they might seem like they were published in short order, one of them I was working on for several years. It was one of the stories that I used to submit to the MFA, and it changed and changed and changed over the course of those years. And I recently was able to figure out a way to make it work. It just wasn't working for a very long time. So several years for one short story that turned out to be, 3,600 words or something like that, the books, the lesson I was working on, off and on since the MFA as well. And then I kind of, I found my agent, and it still wasn't done. I shared it with her, and she was like, when is it going to be done? And then I gave an arbitrary number thinking, oh, I can do that. And then, struggled and got there, I think like 2 months late, and then went through a couple of revisions, and then went through revisions with an editor, several revisions with an editor. And so it took a lot longer than it seemed. And with No Gods, No Monsters, I did write the majority of that within a year and a half, which was the craziest timeline that I've had for that amount of words. But part of that was commitment. Once I did the lesson, I made commitments to write other books, and I probably should have given myself more time, but things work out how they work out. And so part of being an author is hurrying up and waiting, like doing work and then working on that work over many years. And sometimes occasionally, because you have to be a working writer, you have to shift gears and be pragmatic and do something in the time that you have, because contractually you have that time. And, despite the fact that a big chunk of No Gods, No Monsters was written in a year, there's aspects of the book that were informed by things I've been writing for 10 years, for 15 years, for, since I went to undergrad. So there's characters in the book that existed long before I could make them work on the page. And there's a particular section in the book that was previously published because it was originally I didn't intend for it to be in the book, but it felt like it needed to be there because it was an origin story for a character. And that took many, many years to write, and there was many different versions. At one point, it was 2 different stories, and then I mashed them together, and then I changed things up and made it work out. And then I made a lot of cuts when I went through editorial for that first publication. So, long way of me saying the things look a certain way on one side, but all of that work and all of that throwing out and throwing back in is lost. And that's for me, the real work of a writer is doing that kind of stuff and doing it over and over again. And sometimes I have, like 80,000 words of a novel that still does not work. So, and it's one of those things that I've been working on since undergrad. It's one, there's the successes, and then there's also the failures. And those things happen at the same time, but they happen on parallel tracks with each other. It's hard. And, there's just as much, failure as there is success.
Yeah, for sure. I think, definitely feel you on that one. And that, people only see the product, and not necessarily the process. I mean, tonight we've run really late past schedule for a number of reasons, and we're thankful to our viewers who have stuck with us. But as we get ready to depart, I guess what the last question I have for you is a parting word of advice for
I don't want to miss out on answering that. It is important to have a consistent routine, but I think that when I was a younger writer, my routine was like I would try to write 2,000 words a day, and then I would punish myself if I didn't get there, and I'd be like, well, you have to make that up the next day. And that is a surefire way to kill your creative spirit. And so, my recommendation to writers that are starting out and building a portfolio or career is to take it one day at a time and set yourself a goal that's manageable for you. For me, it has been, as of late, for the last few years now, 250 words a day. And sometimes those words are bad. Sometimes those words are good. Sometimes I don't use them in the end. But having that consistent habit, I think, is really good. But it should be a manageable habit. You know, if it's 50 words a day and you show up every day and you're doing 50 words, that is good. I think that it is important to have a process that requires you to be consistent. But it doesn't require you to have to break your back about it. And it doesn't mean that you have to, that work has to work right away. It can just be something that you're doing to kind of find your way into a project, and that's okay as well. The other thing I want to say is that there's room, like one of the things that I felt, and it was a strong pressure for me writing No Gods or Monsters, but especially writing the lesson, was this feeling like I needed to represent the place, this place that I love, that I have my own unique vision and an experience within, my own class situation, my own racial and gender situation, my own familial context, all of these things, my own religious background, all of these things that I felt like was personal, that relate to how I view a place, that went into the book. I would have nights where I would stay up and I would be like, am I representing this well? And I think that the problem there is that we tend to see, we tend to put a lot of pressure on a particular work to do representing that should be a lot of different works. And so in my mind, there's a ton of room for different visions of the Virgin Islands, different visions of St. Thomas, different visions of St. Croix, St. John, different visions of the Caribbean, being a person within that, being a Black man within that, being a woman within that context, being young or old within that context. And I think that if you feel like it's been done already, it hasn't, because you're going to be bringing a particular perspective that is sorely needed, that will be in conversation with work that was there before, and will also be critiquing work that was there before, expanding on it, giving fiction about the Virgin Islands more depth, more reality. And I think that that's important. If you feel like, oh, I can't write a story about monsters in the Caribbean, that's not true. There's your story, by the fact that you're writing it, is going to be different than this story. There's tons of room here, and we'll welcome you. What I love about the Caribbean writers that I've met, and specifically the Virgin Islands writers that I've met, is that they've been welcoming and warm, and encouraging you to take your wildest visions and make them real. Also, don't be afraid to get weird. I had to work through some of my own anxieties about doing speculative work or doing work within a particular genre. But I'm glad I did it. And I think that if you want to write a story that is doing something strange or uncanny that has something to do with the Virgin Islands, do it. If you want to write a horror novel set in the Virgin Islands, or a thriller set in the Virgin Islands, do it. If you want to write Virgin Island romances, do it. There's room here. And I just want to be encouraging to people and let them know that I'll welcome you. It's one of those things that I'm really excited to see. I've been very excited about, just a recent amount of speculative fiction writers that have come into the field that are from the Virgin Islands, and the ones that I've met and have mentored me. So it's one of those things that I think is really important.
Cadwell, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Also want to thank Tiphanie, Yanique. I also want to give a little quick shout out to the production team who has been putting in some extra hours for us to keep us going. Bria Smith, Billy Letsom, Michael Jack, and the whole BVI Lit Fest team, including Dr. Catherine Smith and Miss Annika Christopher at the Department of Culture. Cadwell's been a pleasure having you. And folks, I think that's it for us.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
Yeah, man. And good night.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. From all of your neighbors at the National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
He is